So how does all these muscles work? How does it all come together? Do we need to do strength training for it? Well, the simple answer, I'm going to talk about that in part 3, but the sort of simple answer is no. So let's start with the deepest layer. So let's go back to multifidus and the muscles that go between the transverse processes and the spinous processes. So these muscles, they have a very dense neural network, let's say, or neural structure, whatever you want to call it. So these muscles are, or their primary function is postural feedback. It's not, I wouldn't even say it's necessarily postural control. It's postural feedback. So what it's trying to do is let the central nervous system know, the brain and spine, or spinal cord. It's trying to let that structure know where the spine is. Is it flexed? Is it rotated? Is there a micro movement occurring? So is one vertebra slightly moving more than it should? And then it will sort of create a muscle spasm in a certain area. So all it's trying to do is trying to understand where the spine is in space. So am I rotated to the right, to the left? Am I flexed? Am I extended? It's trying just to pick up that information and feed it back to the central nervous system, so the central nervous system can then send out the necessary signals to the necessary muscles to be able to contract, relax, whatever it needs to do. Because there are people, I'll say, there are people on the internet that have certain social media accounts, and they talk about these in a strength or from the perspective of strength. These muscles don't really have a great deal of strength, and they're not offering you a great deal of strength. They do have that, and they do have that ability because they are there. They will give an initial amount of stability, but they are so their control is so unconscious, you don't really know what you're contracting and when you're contracting, so you can't train these muscles. And you certainly can't train them like you train your biceps. Obviously, when you do a bicep curl, you can feel it, you're in control of it, very conscious control of it. These muscles aren't like that. They're very proprioceptive, they're very postural. It's all about feedback with these muscles. It's all about giving, letting the central nervous system know what's happening. But as a secondary role, they do have, again, a basic stability, just like ligaments do, that sit on the back and the front of the spine. They have a basic stability. When we start moving out into the middle layer and out into the superficial layer, that's when we really start getting the stability and the strength elements. So, in fact, what I will say is I'll start this part by saying the core, talking about the core as a whole, and saying the role of the core is about transferring force and stabilizing the spine, which would bring in posture and things like that. If or when we talk about the transferring of force, what we're trying to, or where we're trying to transfer the force, is either from the arms to the legs, or from the arms and then out, from the legs and out, or from the legs to the arms, or from the arms to the legs. And I'll talk a bit more about that when we come to the exercises. But if we start from that perspective, it changes how we understand the core's working, which then will change the exercises that we choose. So the mid and superficial layer is there to hold the spine in place. Now this does a number of things. It distributes load around the core. When you break posture during an exercise or during a movement, if there was 100 units of load and you maintain posture of the spine, that 100 units of load would be spread around the torso much more evenly. Now it will depend on the movement how evenly, but it will be much more evenly. So again, another crude way of explaining this is if we said there will be 25 units on the back of the core, 25 units on the front of the core, 25 units on the right, and 25 units on the left. That's the kind of thing that would happen if you maintain posture during a lift or an exercise, whatever. If you break that posture as you're lifting, those units of load will concentrate more in one area. It will still have a certain amount on the front, on the right, on the left, and on the back. But if you break into flexion, as an example, you will bring more of that load to the back, or to the back of the torso, which is kind of where the spine is. So a lot more load will go on the spine. That's where you then start unnecessary overloading the spine with exercise. This again is where people start to talk about, well, we need to train that, we need to load that. But if we talk about transferring of force, if we bring that into it, when you break posture during an exercise or a movement, you get what's called an energy leak. So you've generated a lot of force in the legs. If we use throwing as the example, you want obviously the force to go out the hand. What then happens is you want that 100 units of force to be taken from the legs, through the torso, down the arm, and out where the ball goes. That's what you're aiming for. Now, if you break posture, when we talk about exercises, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. But for now, because there is potentially a rotation of the spine, but I'm going to talk about that later, so don't question it just yet. So when you want that force going out through the hand, so you want the force to go from the legs, up the torso, and out the arm. If you maintain proper posture, you will get more of that going out. So let's just say you're going to lose some force somewhere. So let's just say you lose 10%, and so you get 90% of the force generation in the legs going up through the torso, down the arm, and out where the ball wants to go. Now, if you break that posture, you will get an energy leak. So you will only get 80%, 70%, 60%, 50%, whatever it may be. Same as when you lift off the floor. If you do a deadlift off the floor, you generate the force in the legs, but you want to be able to transmit that onto the bar. So it needs to go up the torso, down the arms, and through the hands into the bar. So you lift the bar. Again, if you break posture, you lose force. So it's known as an energy leak. So by training that, you're concentrating load and you're losing energy, or you're losing force to be able to lift. So with the midsection, so all the midsection muscles and the superficial muscles, they help that happen. They help that because what happens in the core is we create something called intra-abdominal pressure. Now, intra-abdominal pressure is the pressure on the inside of the abdomen. So it is a force that is pushing out. Now, your muscles contract and hold that force in. And that's what gives you the stiffness through the torso. So when I've said in the past, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that's what I mean. Because if you overtrain one muscle, then your core can hold the intra-abdominal pressure in. And what if you look at engineering, this is known as hoop stresses, which is basically the force holding so you've got pressure pushing out and you've got a force holding in. That's a hoop stress. That's what your torso is there to do. So when you're lifting off the floor, that's why you want to maintain position. Now, with throwing, there is a rotation of the spine. With a golf swing, there's a rotation of the spine. Now, that's different than a deadlift. So we have to understand the difference, because if we deadlift with a flexed spine and we go from flexion to extension, then you're not maintaining the intra-abdominal pressure that you should be maintaining. You're getting an energy leak. So what you start to understand is that, hang on a minute, all these muscles are trying to create something. And the best sort of metaphor I've been able to do, it's a carbon fibre structure. So if you know what carbon fibre is, it's this like a lattice of fibres that overlap each other. Or if you've worked with wood, or you know wood, you've got plywood. So again, you lay fibres down in opposing directions, and it creates a very strong yet somewhat flexible material. That's kind of what your core is, with the muscles that overlap each other, with the three layers, with the intra-abdominal pressure, intra-abdominal fascia, thoracolumbar fascia. All of this is creating one unit that's very strong, because all of the fibres crisscross each other. They're not all in the same direction, much more like a thigh muscle or a bicep muscle is. So we have to think about it in that way. So the different structure of the core means we train the core differently to the limbs, because the limbs are there as power production. The core is there to transfer that power or that force through the torso wherever it needs to go. So what we will do in the next part is we'll start looking at exercises that essentially fulfill what I've described so far from the torso.